My name is Lilia Morgan. I'm 54 years old. I devoted nearly half of my life to Borealis MedTech, a place I once believed was my second home, the place where I saved the CEO's only son using the algorithm I personally invented. But just 3 weeks after that child survived, I was called into a small conference room and handed a termination letter without so much as a thank you. No farewell party. No one walked me out. Just one cold sentence. You're too valuable to lose but too expensive to keep. Have you ever saved an entire family, only to have them turn their backs on you? If you've ever felt betrayed by the very place you gave your trust, leave a comment below, hit like and subscribe to this channel to hear the rest of my story. Because what they didn't know was, I had been preparing for a long time. I wasn't born into a warm cradle or a real home. My mother died of postpartum infection just over a month after I was born. My father disappeared after her funeral, leaving me in a small county hospital on the outskirts of Indiana. From that point on, I became a ward of the foster care system, where everything had an expiration date, including love. I taught myself to fall asleep to the sound of whistling vents, and I stopped asking why I'd been left behind because I understood, no one stays unless they're bound by blood. When I was 13, I had frequent unexplained nosebleeds. I bruised easily from even the slightest bump and I was constantly exhausted. At first, the community clinic thought I was iron deficient. That changed the day I collapsed in the middle of biology class. I was rushed to an emergency room in Indianapolis and remained there for over 3 weeks. After countless tests, the diagnosis was clear: acute myeloid leukemia. They told me that if it had been discovered a month later, I might not have survived. I still remember the warm, steady voice of the doctor in charge of my treatment. He didn't talk much, but his eyes never wavered. One night, I asked him in a shaky voice through the sound of an N4 machine, "Am I going to die?" He sat beside my bed, gently placed his hand over mine and said, "No, not if you still want to live." That answer didn't promise anything, but it gave me something more precious: the right to choose. With no family by my side, I endured over a year of chemotherapy with only nurses, doctors, and a few books from the hospital library to keep me company. I began reading everything I could find about cells, the immune system, and antibody mechanics. For a sick child, there was only one question in my mind: how do I cure myself? Eventually, that question evolved into, how do I cure others? After recovering, I was placed with a new foster family. They didn't have much, but they were kind. The woman who ran the house, Mrs. Millie, used to tell me every night before dinner, "Lilia, you exist for a reason. Don't let the world make you forget that." Her words didn't ease the hunger on the lean days, but they were the only thing that kept me from giving up. I graduated high school with near-perfect scores. I applied to 3 top biomedical research universities across the country. All 3 rejected me. Not because of my academics. Their letters politely stated, "We're concerned that your current financial situation may not support the demands of the program." I cried, not from rejection, but from the pain of having a dream extinguished just as it began to form. Then I sent an application to a smaller public school, the University of Iowa, along with a handwritten letter straight from my heart. I told them about my illness, my time in the hospital, and my dream of returning to a hospital not as a patient, but as someone who heals. I didn't have high hopes. But 2 weeks later, I received an acceptance letter with a full scholarship for students overcoming hardship. For the first time in my life, I felt like a real door had opened. Throughout my 4 undergraduate years and 3 more in my PhD program, I never had a real summer break. I worked in labs, partly to survive, partly to get access to equipment and active research. I spent more hours next to a gene sequencer than I did in my own bed. My classmates thought I was eccentric, always buried in machines and data. But I didn't care. To me, every molecule, every biochemical reaction was a living symphony I wanted to decode completely. After graduation, I received several job offers from places like Boston and New York, even a teaching position at UC Berkeley. But then I met Jack Borealis, a tech entrepreneur who had lost his wife due to a late diagnosis of ovarian cancer. He had just launched Borealis MedTech with only 10 employees, working out of a rented office on the 3rd floor of a rundown building near Seattle's docks. Jack had no academic credentials, wasn't a scientist, but he had one conviction: technology must serve humanity. His offer wasn't financially attractive. The starting salary was below industry standard, no health insurance for the first year, and the facilities were rudimentary. But he looked me in the eye and said, "I don't need the best. I need the one who's hurt the most, the one who understands how much life is worth." I accepted that day. That's where I laid the first bricks of what would become a biomedical algorithmic system powered by machine learning, capable of analyzing genetic data and detecting anomalies in under 30 seconds. I wasn't confident at first. But when our software helped diagnose a young girl with a rare blood clotting disorder, I knew I was on the right track. As time passed, our team grew, the algorithm evolved, and Borealis slowly transformed from a humble startup into one of the leading names in diagnostic support. But amid the praise and awards, I began to notice something chilling. My name started disappearing from slide decks. It wasn't in the intellectual property filings. And when a product was unveiled, it was Andrew, Jack's successor, who stood under the lights to accept the applause. I used to think that if I just kept contributing, things would correct themselves. I was wrong. They didn't forget me. They erased me. And they did it deliberately. What they didn't know was that during those exhausting years, I had quietly documented my real progress, on my personal devices, stored in places they could never touch. That afternoon, after the surprise meeting where I was told to hand over my work, I returned to my office like a ghost. Everything was still in place. The molecular model hanging on my shelf, the old photo of our team during our first clinical trial, and the ceramic mug that said, "Science is not opinion," gifted by one of our engineers last Christmas. I knew my time was limited, but I didn't leave right away. I plugged in my personal drive and began backing up the data I had a right to keep. My personal notes, development logs for Alpha Layer, and especially the internal audio recordings I often made to track research. Then I opened the system's temp folder and a strange file caught my eye. Project Horizon, Q2 Transition Strategy. The file had been hidden, but it wasn't hard to tell it didn't belong on my device. I hesitated a few seconds, then opened it. It was a 34-page presentation filled with charts, strategies, and a roadmap for an upcoming IPO, scheduled for the third quarter of the year. But what made my chest go tight wasn't the numbers. It was page 8, Key Leadership Restructure Plan. My name was in the first column. Dear Lilia Morgan, to be retired Q2 under strategic transition. Right next to it, in bold font, successor, Elliot Barnes, head of emerging tech strategy. I closed my eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. I wasn't surprised. But that kind of betrayal still catches in your throat. I had personally interviewed him 3 years ago. A freshly minted MIT grad, sharp, ambitious, and skilled at leaving strong impressions on decision makers. I had seen potential in him. But I had also overheard him at a year-end party speaking to investors. "Lilia's a genius, but she's from a different era. AI today needs someone who understands the market, not just the lab." I let it go. I thought he was just posturing. But now everything made sense. I skimmed through the remaining slides. At the end was a transcript, apparently from an off-the-record meeting between Andrew, Elliot, and 2 reps from an investment group called Nexus Capital. Andrew said, "She's an internal figurehead. But legally, everything she built while employed here belongs to the company." One of the Nexus reps replied, "We need to be sure there are no IP disputes before we go public. She could cause problems if she feels cut out." Then Elliot chimed in, his tone cool and assured, "I'm developing an enhanced version based on Lilia's model. We'll launch it as the next generation with enough algorithmic changes to overshadow her contributions in the press." I sat there in silence. The people I once called colleagues, some of whom I had mentored, were now discussing how to erase my name from the very work I had spent my life building. That was the moment I realized, it wasn't just about cutting costs or pushing me out because of age. They wanted to wipe the slate clean. Because I was the last obstacle standing between them and a multimillion-dollar IPO. I stood up and walked out to the back balcony of the office. The sky over Seattle was heavy with gray clouds, and the wind brushed through my hair like a warning. Don't fall apart here. Not now. I looked down at the street below, the same sidewalk where I used to wait for the bus back when the company didn't even have a private parking lot. I thought back to 5 years earlier, when Andrew had just taken over as CEO from his father. Back then I believed he had a heart. I stood by his side, supporting not just the technical vision, but the strategic direction. Then when his son became gravely ill last year, I dropped everything. I stayed up night after night until 2 or 3 in the morning refining the algorithm, working with doctors, running blood monitoring AI simulations by the hour. And now, the reward for that was a prepared transition document with my name removed, just waiting to shove me off the path they were taking. I returned to my desk, unplugged my personal hard drive, and shut down the computer. As I closed the laptop, I saw my reflection in the black screen. My face a little older than it was when I started at Borealis, but my eyes unchanged. The very next day, I rented a small workspace near Lake Union. Not to rest, but to begin preparing for something else, something they didn't know I had been holding on to for a long time. And this time I wouldn't let them take it. I started writing the first lines of code for the upgraded version of our diagnostic system on a winter night 2 years ago. At the time, I didn't intend to hide it from the company. I simply wanted to isolate the development environment to better control performance. The software we were testing had begun to lag when processing pediatric datasets. Every delayed second could mean a life slipping through the cracks. I brought my personal laptop home, created a private repository on an independent server, and began experimenting with a new architecture. I called it Alpha Layer. No one knew about it but me. I logged every line of code, timestamped each build, and documented every analysis. All of it was done after hours on my own equipment in my own home. Each night after the city quieted down, I sat in front of my screen, the keystrokes steady like a heartbeat. There were nights I dozed off at the keyboard, waking up around 3 a.m. to check test logs. I wasn't the most technically brilliant in the field, but I knew our system better than anyone. I wasn't working for recognition. I did it because I had once been that child lying motionless in a hospital bed, and I knew exactly how it felt to wait for an answer. About 6 months in, I integrated Alpha Layer into a prototype device the biomedical team was developing. The results exceeded every expectation. Processing time dropped by nearly 40%, accuracy improved by 12%, especially in difficult cases like early-stage leukemia. When Andrew's son started showing unexplained signs of anemia, I knew immediately what to do. I used Alpha Layer, the unreleased version, to analyze his blood data over a 3-hour window and detected anomalies missed by the older tools. I sent the results to the medical team and they confirmed the diagnosis. That breakthrough helped save the boy's life. Andrew never knew I had used my private software, the one I'd developed in silence, to save his child. In the meeting that followed, he casually acknowledged the incredible efforts of the RD team, then moved on to PR strategy. I didn't correct him. I didn't need his thanks, nor did I feel the need to explain what I saw as basic professional integrity. But from that day forward, I started seriously considering filing a patent for Alpha Layer. Not because I wanted to keep it for myself, but because I understood that if something happened, I would need to prove what belonged to me, and what didn't belong to them. I hired an independent intellectual property attorney in Portland, someone I had met years earlier at a health tech symposium. Her name was Susan Blake, sharp, discreet, and methodical to a fault. I sent her all the files, the source code, development logs, and scanned pages of my handwritten notes with dates. Susan spent 3 weeks reviewing and verifying every legal detail. Then she called me. "Lilia, I've never seen a case as well prepared as yours. If you truly developed this algorithm outside your employment scope, then this is personal intellectual property." I paused for a few seconds, not out of surprise but relief. "Do you want me to move forward with the application?" "I want to keep it quiet until it's needed," I told her. "File it as fast as you can. Just don't make it public." She agreed. 3 months later, I received formal documentation from the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Alpha Layer was officially recognized as my individually owned technology. I stored that document in a thick envelope and placed it in my bank safety deposit box. Alongside it were encrypted digital copies housed on 3 separate servers. One in New York, one in Austin, and one in my private home in Seattle. No one at the company knew. Not a single person, not even the ones closest to me. I still came into work every day, joined meetings, and developed features as if nothing had changed. But in my heart, a door had opened. One to a place where no one could force me to surrender what was mine. I remember one rainy afternoon in Seattle when Andrew walked into my office, beaming because of an article praising Borealis's diagnostic system as a breakthrough in personalized medicine. He sat down, half smiling. "You should be proud, Lilia. The whole industry's talking about our company." I smiled faintly and replied, "Pride doesn't always come from whose name is mentioned, but from knowing what you did to save a life." Andrew didn't catch the meaning behind those words. He stood, patted my shoulder, and left the room, reminding me, "Don't forget to send in the technical report by Friday." I watched him walk away, feeling oddly at peace. Because I knew, my algorithm had saved his son and it no longer belonged to Borealis. No restructuring plan, no IPO roadmap could erase that truth. And when the time came, they'd be forced to face it. I met Marilyn Carter at a small French restaurant tucked into a quiet street in the north end of Bellevue. It wasn't the kind of place people held business negotiations. There were no spotlights, no reporters, no polished suits. Just wine, candlelight, and the soft sound of piano drifting from a corner of the room. I arrived 10 minutes early, ordered a cup of hot ginger tea, and sat across from a painting of the Italian countryside hanging near the window. I remember feeling a strange sense of calm, as if something had finally clicked into place after years of imbalance. When Marilyn entered, I recognized her immediately, even though it had been over a decade. Same confident posture, same sharp brown eyes behind delicate round glasses. She wore a simple ivory turtleneck and a gray silk scarf. No jewelry. No heavy perfume. "Lilia," she smiled, her voice just as deep and even as I remembered. "I've waited more than a year for this moment." I stood and shook her hand. "I didn't expect you to be the first one to reach out." "Sometimes," she said as she took her seat and locked eyes with me, "the quiet observers are the ones who see value most clearly." We chatted lightly for nearly 30 minutes about everything except business. The way biotech changed during the pandemic, the ethical dilemmas of diagnostic AI, even the jasmine plant in her garden that hadn't bloomed on time in years. But I knew we both did, we were just waiting for the right moment. Finally, she reached into her bag, pulled out a thick envelope and placed it on the table. "This is a formal offer," she said, voice firm but unhurried. "I want you to come to Harper Wells as Chief Technology Officer. You'll have full authority over our technical direction. We're building something new from the ground up. And I want Alpha Layer at the center of it." I didn't rush to open the envelope. I looked at her. "Why me?" "Because you're the only one who not only has the vision, but the courage to protect it to the very end." She paused, then added, "I've followed your work since the Federal Research Board back in 2016. I once flagged a report you wrote, not for the data but for the way you framed the question. Very few people in this industry ask with their heart." For the first time in weeks, I felt something warm rise in my chest. Not pride. It was the feeling of being seen, for who I truly was. "There's one condition," I said, slowly pulling my hand away from the now cold teacup. "I won't sign anything unless you agree to this." Marilyn raised an eyebrow, unsurprised. "Go ahead. I have a team at Borealis. They helped me develop the core of Alpha Layer. They never betrayed me, but now they're being sidelined, pushed out of the projects. I want you to protect them. If they choose to leave, I want them to have new positions, fair and aligned with their talent." She didn't take long to consider. "How many people?" "6. A few are software engineers. One works in biomedical data analysis, another in systems implementation." "Names?" I listed them one by one. Miguel Reed, Yasmin Holloway, Rachel King, Samuel Dorsey, Nina Fan, and Jake Thornton. Each one was an irreplaceable part of Alpha Layer, not just technically but ethically. Marilyn pulled a pen from her purse, scribbled on the back of a napkin, then looked up. "I agree. But I want them to make that choice themselves. I won't pressure anyone to turn their back on their former company. They need to know who they're following and why." "I won't put them in a difficult position," I replied. "But if they choose to leave, I need them protected." She nodded, then slid the envelope toward me. "Initial equity, 3%. If the project hits 3 milestones within 18 months, it rises to 6. I want you to feel this is fair." I opened the envelope and reviewed the preliminary contract. Everything was clear. No hidden language. No ambiguity around ownership. One particular clause made me stop. Alpha Layer will be recognized as the intellectual property of Dr. Lilia Morgan, licensed exclusively to Harper Wells under terms detailed in Appendix A. I looked at her. "Aren't you afraid another company might try to take it?" "That's business," she replied. But if you're standing beside the creator, they can't replicate the soul of the technology. I'm not buying an algorithm. I'm partnering with the one who made it. I signed the memorandum that very evening. No headlines. No cameras. But I knew. This moment marked the beginning of something bigger than any project I'd ever done. I would be the one holding the lantern now. And no one could dim its light again. Monday morning, I woke earlier than usual. Not out of anxiety, but because something inside told me things were finally shifting. The soft light filtered through the window of my small apartment by Lake Union. I poured a strong cup of black coffee and turned on my phone. The first message came from Marilyn, sent right at 6:30 a.m. Just 4 words, "It's out. Stay ready." I opened my browser. On the home pages of the 3 biggest tech publications in the US, TechPulse, BioFrontier, and The Wall Board, was the same headline. Harper Wells Biotech officially secures exclusive rights to AlphaLayer platform. A breakthrough in rare disease diagnostics. Below the title was a photo of me in a white lab coat, standing beside Marilyn Carter at the company's new research center, holding a model of blood cell data architecture. In the bottom corner read, "For Lilia Morgan, official inventor of AlphaLayer." I sat still for a few minutes, not because I doubted what I was seeing but because I was overwhelmed. After so many years of being unnamed, hidden behind the curtain, something that truly belonged to me was finally being called by its rightful name. Not represented. Not replaced. Not buried under a collective effort. Minutes later, my phone began to ring non-stop. The first call was from Susan Blake, my IP attorney. "Congratulations, Lilia. I've got 3 major law firms asking to verify AlphaLayer's legal status." "It's fully documented," I said calmly. "Documented down to the punctuation. But the thing is, Borealis has no idea they're sitting on a live grenade." Within the hour, financial news alerts started pouring in. Borealis stock had dropped over 7% by mid-morning. On investment and healthcare forums, people began asking, is the software Borealis is supplying to over 120 hospitals even legal anymore? A long-form article on HealthWeek ran the headline, "Should the FDA suspend Borealis account IQ until IP disputes are resolved?" At 10:30 a.m. I received a text from Miguel. "You just threw Borealis leadership into chaos. They've been locked in the boardroom all morning. So Andrew looks pale as a ghost." I typed back a short reply, "Everything's right on time." An hour later, the desk phone in my new office rang. My new assistant, Rachel, informed me that representatives from 3 major hospitals had contacted Harper Wells seeking clarification on the diagnostic software's licensing rights. One of them was St. Vincent Medical Center, where I had worked during the early stages of algorithm testing. "They said if licensing isn't clear," Rachel told me, "they'll be forced to suspend the old system per their internal compliance board. They're requesting our transfer agreement." I instructed her to send the ownership certification and patent documents immediately, complete with the red seal from the U.S. Patent Office. Everything had been prepared in advance. I didn't come into this battle without armor. By late afternoon, Borealis stock had fallen a total of 18%, dragging the TechMed sector index down slightly. A national financial network aired a short feature. Borealis in free fall. What happens when a critical technology ends up in the hands of a competitor? The anchor read from Harper Wells' press release, then cut to archived footage from a tech conference 3 years prior. Andrew standing on stage taking credit for most of Account IQ's development. My name wasn't mentioned then. But now everything had changed. I received an email from someone I never expected to hear from, Denise Harris, Borealis head of HR. The same woman who had handed me the termination envelope without looking me in the eye. "Lilia, I know this is a sensitive time. Andrew would like to request a private meeting to discuss AlphaLayer. We hope you'll consider it." I forwarded the email to Susan and Marilyn with one simple line. "No private meetings. If they want to talk, let their legal team contact ours." Marilyn called me 5 minutes later. "Are you ready for phase 2 of the strategy?" "Every step has gone exactly as planned," I replied. "And I haven't told you everything yet." Marilyn chuckled. "Then let them keep stumbling in the dark, while we shine the light toward the future." I ended the call and stood, looking out the office window where late autumn sunlight filtered through the trees. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt relief. Not because they were losing, but because I was no longer forced into silence. That evening, just as I stepped out of the Harper Wells lab, my phone vibrated repeatedly inside my bag. It wasn't Miguel or the research team. It was an unknown number. I let it ring 3 times, then declined the call. Moments later, a message came through. Lilia, this is Andrew. We need to talk privately about Alpha Layer and everything that's happening. I stood still in the long carpeted hallway, the overhead lights reflecting softly on the polished wooden floor. At the far end was the exit, and outside the Seattle rain was falling gently, but I didn't move. I read the message 2 more times as if to confirm that Andrew had really reached out himself. I didn't respond. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I no longer wanted to say anything on his terms. The next morning, during our internal briefing, I received official word from our legal team. 2 of the 3 largest hospital systems in the country had pulled their contracts with Borealis. One of them, Westmont Medical Center, the company's second-largest partner, had immediately stopped using the Account IQ system after an independent advisory group flagged a risk of intellectual property violation. I was sitting in the conference room when Rachel leaned in to whisper something to Marilyn. The FDA just requested all development documentation from Borealis dating back to 2020. If they can't prove the core architecture is separate from Alpha Layer, they could face a temporary suspension. Marilyn didn't look surprised. She simply nodded and turned to me. The dominoes have started to fall. By noon, my phone rang again. This time it was a private number with no caller ID. I answered in silence. A voice came through slowly, heavy with tension. Lilia, I don't mean to bother you, but things are spiraling out of control. I recognized the voice immediately. It was Andrew, but without his usual polished confidence. Instead, he sounded like a man trying to hold something broken together. Could you give me 10 minutes? Somewhere off the record, away from lawyers, away from the media. I paused a few seconds, then asked him directly, why should I? He let out a long sigh. Because I didn't think it would go this far. I miscalculated. I'll admit that. But I don't want to see the company collapse. You spent 15 years with us. We've been through so much together. I gripped the phone tighter. I saved your son, Andrew. Do you remember that? That boy is alive because of an algorithm I developed. Alone. Not for the company. Not for the media. For a child who deserved a chance. And how did you thank me? A termination envelope sent through HR. No phone call. No handshake. You said I was too expensive to keep. And now you want me to help you keep what? There was silence on the other end. I could picture his confused stare, the furrowed brow I'd seen so many times, as if he never expected me to say it aloud. I'm not calling to apologize, he said, voice lower now. I'm calling because I know you're the only one who can fix this. I know Alpha Layer is yours. But if you're willing to negotiate privately, not publicly, I believe we can find a win-win solution. I looked out the window. The rain from the night before had passed. The city streets glowed beneath early winter sunlight, reflecting hurried footsteps and bundled coats. Andrew, you're mistaken, I said slowly. This isn't a matter between 2 people anymore. This is about principle. About dignity. About boundaries. He cut in, pleading. Lilia, please. I'm no longer your employee, I said firmly. If you want to use my technology, you'll have to do what any other partner would do. Submit a formal proposal, go through legal, and negotiate based on its actual value. No private dinners. No after-hours chats. And absolutely no more favors. I ended the call. Not out of anger, but because it was time to end these conversations based on old ties. I had once been the only person who stayed up with Andrew during the nights he feared losing his son. I had once asked my team to pause other projects just to help with the peripheral blood data, because Andrew didn't know how to explain the test results to his wife. I used to think, if I were loyal enough, I'd earn respect. But no. They don't remember what I did. They only remember what they're missing now that I'm gone. And now, if they want anything back, they'll have to learn how to ask for the right to use my mind. That year's National Biomedical Conference was held in San Diego, in a convention center right on the shoreline, where ocean waves lapped gently against the glass wall behind the main stage. I had been invited by the organizers to deliver the keynote session on artificial intelligence in rare disease diagnostics. That morning, as I entered Hall A3, I was escorted to the VIP seating area near the front. It was still early, not many attendees had arrived. I pulled out my iPad to review the presentation, scanning through my notes, when a warm voice from behind caught my ear. "Are you Lilia Morgan?" I turned around. An older man, silver-haired and lean, wore a soft gray sweater over a crisp white shirt. His face had aged more than I remembered, but those eyes, deep and steady, were unmistakable. I stood up abruptly, my hands trembling. It took a breath before I could speak. "Reynolds, is it really you?" He smiled, gently but moved. "I didn't expect to see you here. It's been over 30 years, hasn't it?" I stepped toward him, said nothing, and embraced him tightly. It was the kind of embrace you give when a 13-year-old part of yourself finds a lost piece of memory long buried under time. "You still remember me?" asked, my voice rough. How could I forget the little girl who insisted on knowing every medication she was given, and demanded to see her blood test results every morning? He chuckled, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "You're the reason I didn't retire early." I didn't know what to say. Every emotion I'd suppressed seemed to rise all at once. Gratitude, awe, and the quiet joy of seeing him still healthy, still devoted to the same field in which he once saved my life. We sat together through the entire conference session that day. He told me how he'd left the hospital in Indianapolis and moved on to advise biomedical research projects at Harper Wells. No longer practicing directly, but still deeply involved in innovations in cancer treatment. "I've been following your work for years," he said, fingers interlaced, gaze turned to the ocean beyond the glass. "When I first heard the name Alpha Layer in an internal research review, I had a feeling the person behind it wasn't just a systems architect. They had to be someone who had once lived inside the system. Someone who had laid in that hospital bed and waited for every blood count update." I turned to face him. "And you guessed it was me?" "Not guessed. I knew." He smiled, nodding slowly. "You once told me that if you lived, you'd devote your life to making sure no one ever had to fear not knowing what was happening inside their own body again. I've never forgotten that." I turned my face away for a moment. I didn't want him to see my eyes welling up. That afternoon, I canceled a meeting with an investment group to spend another hour with him. We sat at a small cafe below the conference hall. He ordered black tea with honey and I chose hot chocolate. "I used to hope," he said, voice softening, "that one day a student of mine would carry this path forward, not for fame, just with enough perseverance and conscience. But as the years passed, I began to doubt it. Until I saw you today." I placed my hand over his and held it tight. "Without you, there wouldn't be this version of me. You didn't just heal me. You were the first person who made me believe I was capable of doing something that truly mattered." We sat there quietly for a while, no words exchanged. Just the sound of spoons tapping against cups and footsteps passing by. That night in my hotel room, I stayed up nearly the whole night sketching out an idea I'd never seriously considered before. I wanted to start a scholarship fund, not a symbolic donation like companies often do for PR, but a real, dedicated program. One that fully supports orphan students or those from foster care to pursue degrees in biomedical science and health technology. I named it the Reynolds Fellowship, and committed the entire first-year royalty payment from my Alpha Layer licensing contract to fund its launch. The next morning, I printed a draft proposal and brought it to Marilyn. She read through it slowly. When she reached the last page, she looked up and asked, "Would you like the company to be part of this?" "Absolutely," I replied. "But the first condition is that the name stays exactly as it is. I don't want it to be named after me." She nodded and signed at the bottom of the document. When I returned to the conference room for the closing panel discussion that day, I saw Dr. Reynolds standing at the entrance, leaning on a simple wooden cane, looking at me with the warmth of a father watching a daughter he never had. I didn't say anything. I just gave him a small nod. Because some things don't need to be said, yet everyone understands. The technology showcase was held on a Tuesday morning at the Federal Convention Center in Washington, D.C. We didn't choose the location just for prestige. It was where regulators, technology experts, media representatives, and investors all converged. Every attendee had received a short briefing packet in advance, summarizing the origins of Alpha Layer, verified clinical data, and most importantly, documentation of exclusive ownership from the United States Patent Office. Marilyn opened the presentation with a brief introduction, then stepped aside and left the rest to me. I stood at center stage, a soft light shining across my shoulders, facing hundreds of expectant eyes. I didn't bring a printed speech, just a prototype in my hands, and everything I had built over the last 20 years. "I'm not here to talk about the past," I began. "I'm here to show you how this technology can save lives in the very near future." We launched the live demo using the latest version of AlphaLayer to process a simulated medical dataset containing complex clinical markers. On the large screen behind me, diagnostic lines appeared in real time. The system didn't just detect risk, it stratified it, proposed preliminary treatment paths, and flagged hidden anomalies not visible to the human eye. The entire process took less than 50 seconds. When the screen went dark, the room was completely silent. Then came the applause, first scattered, then rising into a sustained standing ovation. Immediately after the event, more than 20 media outlets ran breaking headlines. Articles appeared everywhere. AlphaLayer signals major leap forward in modern diagnostics. Harper Wells unveils technology that redefines speed and accuracy in healthcare. But the most striking response came from my former competitor. Just hours after the demo, Borealis issued an internal announcement. Temporary suspension of account IQ system rollout due to licensing review requirements. My name wasn't in the memo. But I didn't need it to be. Because at that moment the entire industry knew who held the keys now. Later that same day, an internal memo was leaked by the Borealis tech team, confirming that the core infrastructure of Account IQ shared 84% similarity with the algorithm patented under AlphaLayer. At the same time, an independent audit commissioned by the FDA released a preliminary finding. Borealis appeared to have deliberately omitted the original inventor from their initial tech registration. The Borealis board convened an emergency meeting at 9 p.m. By midnight, media outlets received a statement. Andrew McAllister suspended as CEO pending investigation. Elliot Barnes submitted his resignation that same night. I learned this from a message Miguel sent me. Just one line. At last it came full circle. The next morning, within the first 15 minutes of market opening, Borealis stock was being dumped en masse. They lost nearly a third of their value in just 2 days. In tech and healthcare forums, the headlines dubbed the crisis the intellectual property earthquake. Reporters crowded outside the Borealis headquarters, where staff had been instructed to work remotely until the company could stabilize media narratives. But no press release could flip the board. I kept working as usual at Harper Wells. No interviews. No public statements. But deep down I knew, this wasn't revenge. It was the result of patience. The answer to a question I'd carried for decades. Can someone truly take another's mind and not face consequences? That afternoon I walked home alone to my lakeside apartment. Seattle wore a veil of thin clouds and soft sun, the water still as glass. I stopped on a small wooden bridge that led into the park, where I used to sit and read research papers. A light breeze passed by, carrying the scent of grass and mist. I sat on an old stone bench, quietly watching the water. There was no bitterness left in me. Only one unmistakable feeling. The truth eventually finds its voice. And sometimes you don't have to raise yours for people to hear it. The auditorium for that year's Women in Biotech Leadership Summit was designed with open space and natural light. Soft, spiraling lights overhead mimicked DNA strands, inspiring innovation and possibility. I walked onto the stage wearing a simple charcoal suit and a white collarless blouse. No name tag, no title. They knew who I was. And this time they called me by the right name. Marilyn sat in the front row. Beside her was Dr. Reynolds, who insisted on flying in from Portland just to attend my one and only presentation during the 3-day event. Miguel and the entire old team from Borealis, now department heads at Harper Wells, were there too. I saw their faces, each one familiar, each one quietly beaming the same message. Say it. We're here. And we're listening. The host briefly introduced the theme. Intellect has no expiration date. It was a phrase that had come from a conversation between me and Marilyn months earlier, when we talked about how the scientific world often forgets the value of lived experience. I took the microphone and drew a deep breath. I was once a child with no family, no assets, No one to write my name on a hospital admission form. At 13, I was diagnosed with leukemia. Everything about me felt fragile, except one thing: the belief that if I survived, I would come back to heal. I didn't read a speech. I told a story, plain and honest. I didn't mention my victory over Borealis. I didn't name those who had fired me. I spoke only of what kept me standing all these years: persistence, integrity, and the resolve to never let my worth be defined by a signature in a boardroom. I worked for one company for 15 years, I continued. And when I no longer aligned with their interests, they called me into a small room, handed me an envelope and said, "Thank you for your contributions. We're restructuring." I paused. There were audible sighs in the room. A few slow nods. People who had also received that envelope. Who had also stepped out of a room and left their youth behind. But I didn't walk away empty-handed. I carried the one thing they could never take: my thinking, my discipline, my trust in the data I built with my own hands. And the patent with my name on it, the one they never knew existed. I shared the story of the Reynolds Fellowship. That after 1 year we had awarded full tuition, living stipends, and research resources to 32 students. Most of them raised in foster care or who had experienced early loss. Among them, 10 were young women and 6 were students of color. Voices rarely seen in specialized fields like biomedical science and genetic algorithms. A young woman named Amanda sent me an email. I told the audience. In it, she wrote, "I used to believe this field wasn't meant for people like me. Until I read your story." I pulled a small folded paper from my pocket and read from it. She was once seen as not young enough, not flexible enough, not in the right moment. And yet she was the one who built the technology that saves hundreds of lives every day. If she could do it, I'll try. I folded the note again, not bothering to hide my tearful eyes. "They once fired me after I saved a life," I said, looking toward the front row. "But they couldn't take away my true value, because it was never theirs to begin with." The applause came, steady and strong, and it didn't stop. But in that moment, I didn't feel like I was standing on a stage. I saw the 13-year-old girl lying still in a hospital bed on a winter night in Indianapolis. I saw Dr. Reynolds beside me, the soft yellow light of the emergency room casting shadows on his hand as he held mine. And I knew I had walked that girl all the way to the other side. As I stepped off stage, I walked slowly down the back hallway of the auditorium. Mrs. Millie, the woman who fostered me for 3 years, was there unexpectedly, leaning on her cane, eyes glistening with tears. I moved toward her, unable to speak, and just wrapped my arms around her like a child who had always wished to call someone mom. She gently patted my back and whispered, "You did it, Lilia. You don't need anyone's approval now. But they'll remember your name." And in that moment I understood, glory may come late, but when it lands in the right hands, it finally belongs. I don't know if my story touched a place in your heart, but if you've ever felt pushed aside, ever seen your hard work dismissed, ever walked out of a closed door still carrying faith in your own worth, then I hope you'll remember, there are things no one can take from you. And if you've ever stayed silent because you thought you weren't important enough to be heard, I hope this story reminds you, there are no limits to intellect, perseverance, or kindness. No matter who you are or how old you are, you can begin again. And you deserve to be recognized. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Leave a comment and share your thoughts. Maybe your story will be the spark someone else out there needs to keep going. And if you'd like to keep hearing true life journeys, stories of choices, family, trust, and grit, hit follow on this channel. I'll keep telling them chapter by chapter, memory by memory. Not to claim credit, but to hold on to what truly matters in this life, together.